Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Dr. Glenn is a clinical psychologist and former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leaving the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Before we get started, if you haven't downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
I'm here with John Chancellor from Teach the Soul. TeachTheSoul.com, John?
Yes.
And John is my long-term friend, long-term mentor, actually was originally a long-term fan of my marketing work a long time ago. Guy I spend a lot of time with, put a lot of faith in, and who dedicates himself to educating the public about very soulful, meaningful things. He's got a blog over at teachthesoul.com. I recommend that everybody go there right now and subscribe. You'll learn all types of interesting things and all kinds of interesting things to think about from these very short daily blog posts. So how are you, John?
Doing great. How about you?
Good. Really good. I happened to read one of your articles, I think it was yesterday, and you were writing about the differing way that we treat children, or the different way that we learn when we're children or are expected to learn when we're children versus how we treat ourselves as an adult. It occurred to me that it was extremely relevant because I use similar analogies when I'm helping people to figure out how to treat themselves kindly when they're recovering from making a mistake with their eating. And I just thought if I took a few minutes to have you explain that and ask you a couple of questions, that it would be infinitely valuable to our audience. Would you mind walking us through that?
No. And it's funny that you said that, because the title of the essay is Learning to Walk. I start the essay with a quote. Actually, this is my favorite quote of all time. And it's, "We have met the enemy and it is us." And that was from the comic strip Pogo. You have to be older than probably most of your audience to remember, but Walt Kelly was the cartoonist that created the comic strip, and he passed away in 1973. So that gives you a little hint of how the thought is. But what happened was, this happened a few years ago, and I was in the presence of a young child, probably year and a half, and the child was learning to walk. And if you've ever observed a young toddler learning to walk, it's one of the most interesting things that you can see, because they have such little control of their limbs. Their motor skills are certainly not developed, but one thing is developed, and that is their desire to learn to walk. And this was a family gathering, and we were all watching this little toddler. It wasn't the first steps, but she certainly had not mastered the art of walking. But here's what was interesting. She would take a few tentative steps, and you know how they flail their arms and are very unsteady on their feet. And she would either fall down or sit down. But what was really interesting was what the adults would do when the child came to the end of the short walk. Is everybody would clap, and they would laugh, and they would offer words of encouragement. And the child would sit there knowing that they had not been totally successful, but the child was encouraged because everybody was happy for her. And so somebody would help her back up on her feet, and she would try again. She would take off trying again. And in the same idea, I had observed a young child learning to ride a bike. Same thing happens. It's very interesting to watch, because when a young child is learning to ride a bike, you can see the bike wobbling down the street, and you're kind of leaning from one side to the other, trying to use body English to keep the child from falling over. And the adults were often running behind the bike, every now and then putting their hand on the back of the seat, steadying it. But the adults were always offering encouragement. So it got me thinking, about these two examples of how people go about learning new skills. And what was startling, or a stark contrast for me, was the different way that adults treat learning than children. When we try a new skill as adults, if we don't master it in a very short period of time, we often give up. We don't have a lot of people standing around offering us encouragement and support. If we don't get good at it in a hurry, we're very quick to give up. And what that brought up for me is what would happen if we as adults were treated more like children, or approached learning more like children, so that we would not be so quick to give up. We would have more encouragement. It just was a puzzle to me why we are so quick to give up, why we think that why we're any different from children, why learning a new skill is so challenging for us. As parents, when we're dealing with children learning to walk, we're going to stick with them until they learn to master it. But as adults, we've come to accept that it's okay to quit after little effort. And when we undertake extremely difficult tasks, like starting a new business, learning a new job, we often give up after encountering the most minor difficulties. If you think about it, how many times does it take a child to fall before they can walk efficiently? Dozens, maybe even hundreds?
I would have said 487.
I think you would have probably been closer to correct than dozens.
I remember with my sister, yeah.
Because it certainly does.
I sometimes wonder how they survived that period. So,
well, they survive it because they look around and see everybody else walking, and they're determined they're going to
yes,
learn to walk, and they don't think that they have to live up to expectations. They don't have this voice in their head that says, oh, you're a failure, you can't do this. They are determined to do it.
Where does that voice of failure come from, do you think?
I think that it comes from a few thousand years ago when we lived in tribes. We became very concerned about what our tribe mates thought about us and whether we were accepted, whether we were a valuable member of the tribe. If we did something that was not socially acceptable, if we weren't contributing totally to the success of the tribe, you could get kicked out of the tribe. And then survival was dependent upon being an accepted tribe member. So I think that's a carryover from a few thousand years ago.
So we didn't really have this age of individualism where you could make decisions about everything you wanted to do and who you wanted to be in the tribe.
That's correct.
It was more like step out of line and we'll kill you, or we'll abandon you here.
Well, we'll abandon you. It was a polite death sentence. Then survival was a community effort. You had to be a part of the tribe. You could not survive on your own. I think that a lot of the fears that we have are grounded in the need for acceptance. We're always concerned about what other people will think of us. That can be traced directly back to the tribe and how we were thought about in the tribe.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. What's the solution, do you think?
Well, the lesson here is to be like a child learning to walk. That is to accept that if you're learning a new skill, if you're attempting something that's difficult, that's worthwhile, you're going to stumble a few times, maybe 487 times. But if you want to master it, you're going to have to be like a child. You have to get up and try again. The child does not criticize himself or herself for falling.
You know, John, the other thing that I think makes that voice of self-criticism so strong when you're talking about things that produce a lot of pleasure, like bagels and donuts and pizza and pasta and chocolate bars and Doritos and all those types of things. There is a reptilian brain-driven search for that pleasure to make it occur again. And unfortunately, what happens is those voices of self-castigation make the individual feel too weak to resist the next urge. And as a consequence, the negative voices are reinforced by the binge itself. If you think, I suck, I'm pathetic, I should just give up and be a happy fat person, and then you have a donut, you've reinforced that thought, and you're more likely to have that thought the next day. I think on top of everything you're talking about, I think that it would be really cool if we had a whole group of people following us around and cheering for us to get up and stay up and stop eating those things we're not supposed to have, or, you know, have them in the modified amounts we're supposed to have them in. I think in addition to that, we've got the reinforcing effects of you get what you pet, as my dog trainer used to say. If the animal behaves in a particular way and then you pet it, then you're going to get more of that.
Absolutely.
So if you criticize yourself a whole bunch and then give yourself a reward, you're going to criticize yourself even more.
Mm-hmm. Most of the pop psychologists, motivational speakers out there tell you to make a plan, write it down, visualize it, and you'll achieve it. Well, the science is pretty clear. Unless you go through this obstacle evaluation part, your chances of success are much less. But what's going to get in your way is a very valuable process. And I think too often we neglect to do that.
There you go. And I think the research actually says that if you imagine this wonderful outcome, I mean, that's a big part of creating the results. But if that's all you do, you actually might be less likely to get the results because your mind will relax and stop working on the plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anything else, John, that we should have told these people?
I think the big thing is when you approach anything, be it starting a new habit, think like a child. Think like a child learning to walk. You're going to fall. You're going to fall more than once, but be like a child, get up, go at it again. Because if you do that long enough, you're going to get it. The child doesn't beat themselves up about falling down. The child just gets up and goes at it again.
Okay, well, John, thank you very much. Until next time.
Very good.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. If you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.